Hello to Ayisha and Gregg. Nice to finally meet you.
Same
I'm
here.
Eric. Nice to meet you. Um, so I wanted to start off by giving a few words to those who don't know me already. Um, Hello, welcome. I'm Vieux, a third year at the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. I'm also a co-founder and the first head 3L of the Student Sports Law Network. I'll be tonight's moderator for the SSLN's Outside Counsel panel. Earlier this year at UF, I led the Entertainment and Sports Law Symposium, and it was a huge success that ended up being one of my last in-person events of law school. I joined the other founders in starting the SSLN because of my passion for sports law, community, and student service. After law school, I plan on being in New York, working in labor and employment law as an outside counsel, hopefully in sports. It is now my pleasure to moderate this panel consisting of these three well-respected attorneys that do what I plan on doing after sitting for the 2021 bar. We are joined by Ayisha McHugh, Gregg Clifton, and Eric Galko. I will hand it off to them to introduce themselves and do most of the speaking from here on out. I just wanted to give a brief reminder that if you have any questions, make sure to message the Q&A moderator, and we'll make sure to get to them at the end. So starting with Ayisha, could you give a brief introduction?
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Ayisha McHugh. I'm a second-year associate at Proskauer. Went to Columbia Law School, graduated in 2019, and the prompt was to say something that we love about our work. And I would definitely say the variety of what I get to do. I think sometimes it's often very surreal when I stop and think that this is the thing that I dreamt of and was working so hard to get to. So to now have, day-to-day ability to do the work that I am passionate about is definitely something that I love about what I'm able to do.
That's great, thank you. Now I wanted to ask Gregg the same question just to introduce himself.
Sure. I feel a little out of place here, a lot older than Ayisha is, but I like to share with people a little bit of my career. I've been very fortunate. I've had an opportunity to pursue two dreams in my life. One was to have an opportunity to work on the agent side of the business, which I did for over 20 years. And then now for the last 10 years or so, I've had an opportunity to come back to the law firm where I started at Jackson Lewis and be the co-chair of our sports practice, which is a unique opportunity where we represent agencies, teams, conferences, as well as some professional leagues, obviously, in their labor and employment and all their legal issues relating to sports law. So it's a unique combination where I've had a chance to work on both sides of the industry and experience the highs and lows of the agent side, working with some of the world's greatest athletes, at the same time now having a chance to work on the other side of the business and experience the highs and lows from a college professional as well as an agency perspective.
Great. Eric, if you would also introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Even though.
Yeah, no, I'm Eric Galko. Went to Villanova Law School, and currently I work. My company is Optimum Scouting, but in my legal career, I've worked with the Minnesota Vikings for a short period of time, doing some of their legal work. Actually worked in criminal law for a minute, but a lot of my legal work nowadays falls into really four buckets. One is working with startup companies in the sports world, working with NFL agents in a variety of ways, some legal, some player personnel and scouting, but more recently, working with pro leagues. Recently work at the XFL. I work with them in a variety of capacities, and then especially NIL law, which is, I guess, it's starting to be a thing. Florida and a couple other states are passing NIL laws, so advising brand managers, schools, agents, etc. on that piece. It's a bit of those four buckets, all of which have been in a consulting role. But I think a bit like Gregg, my experience is where it comes in. Having that perspective and general knowledge is what I'm passionate about doing, and providing the perspective of a lot of different areas in sports and sports law, and kind of making those into a cohesive consulting plan in a variety of ways for the people I work with.
Great, thank you. All great answers. So next I wanted to ask you all about mentorship. I wanted to start with Ayisha. So breaking into whether it be big law, agent work, sports law work, it has a lot to do with fostering and developing relationships. Ayisha, if you would talk to us a little bit about how just mentorship and I guess having people in your corner really help the development of your career, and just any tips that you would give us students on forming those relationships and making sure we're getting out there, networking.
Yeah, definitely. I give so much credit to my mentors. I'm grateful to the people that I even, if I wanted to right now, could send a text off and say, hey, this is the question that I have, or this is what I'm thinking about when it came to deciding, what firm I wanted to go to. My mentors played a role in that. When I think of the internships and externships that I had during college, during law school, which laid the foundation for me to have exposure to sports and then sports law, that was because of mentors, really not just being mentors, but also being sponsors and leveraging their network to give me greater exposure to this industry and to what sports has to offer, and understanding the diversity that is within it. I think the most important thing about mentorship is understanding your role as the mentee. Consistency is key. You want to ensure that your mentor feels like it's worthwhile to invest in you and give you the time, that you can then benefit from learning from their experience, and then they want to bet on you, right? They want to be able to leverage their network and connect you with opportunities and connect you with people, and be a resource to you. And I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the mentors who believed in me, didn't shoot down the dream. When I told them I want to do sports law, they weren't like, oh, it's a small niche. I don't know about that. Try something else. Because that is something that I heard time and time again, whether it was family or friends or professors. It was just like, let's maybe think about another more realistic area of law to pursue. So having mentors who could say, let's make it happen, and let me think about who I can connect you with, or let's think about how we strategize for what opportunities you pursue and when you pursue them, that was definitely a game changer. When I can look back and, the advice that I often give law students who are saying, they may want to pursue sports in the big law capacity, I say, you want to make sure your resume speaks for yourself, right? You want to know a couple of things. One, why? Why are you interested in sports? Is it as a perspective of being a fan, or are you actually interested in the business of sports? Because as a sports lawyer, yes, it's great to be a fan. I'm also excited about the games. I get the same alerts that you do, whether it's the notifications or the pages that I follow on social media. But I also have to have an appreciation for the business of sports, because that's what I'm closely tied to in the work that I do as an attorney. So that's one thing. And the other thing is understanding, what is the point of entry? Is it really just a matter of wanting to touch sports in some way, or is it a longer term goal of wanting to be at a certain level or of influence? So I would definitely say, rounding it out, having mentors who have been able to be side by side with me, thinking through those things, helping me understand the nuance of it, has been so instrumental in my development and the exposure that I've had.
I think I'll jump in here. I think listening to Ayisha, I think it's a difference between generations, and it's so great to see programs like this tonight and the benefits that Ayisha got from mentorships along the way. When I was in law school and trying to merge into sports law, there really was a lot of people looking at me like I had, really craziness inside my head, because back then the only way really interested in the industry was to become an agent. Most teams didn't have any type of general counsel leadership in their front office. Most front offices were run by former scouts who had been promoted. So it was a totally different world than it is now. But I think the one thing that's great about now, as is evidenced, as I said, by this program, is the opportunities that all of you have, and the ability to take care of opportunities and to really develop proper mentorship relationships. The one thing that I remember in my career, and people might laugh when I tell this story, but the bottom line is my first job in sports was actually helping the New Jersey Nets mascot in and out of its uniform, or costume, whatever you want to call it. But I was fortunate enough by doing that, some people with the Nets introduced me to the then general counsel of the New Jersey Sports Authority, who was a lawyer who actually hated sports. He was assigned to that because he was an environmental lawyer at the time. The Meadowlands, as any of you know, was built on swampland. So he was assigned to be the general counsel to deal with all the environmental issues. Had no interest in sports. So I got an opportunity in my second year of law school through an introduction from the Nets personnel that I worked with to meet with him. And I got a chance to be his law clerk for my summer between my second and third year of law school and during my third year of law school, and got exposed to more things and did more things I probably had no business doing. But I think the biggest thing more than anything else was preparation and being prepared, as Ayisha was just discussing, when the opportunity comes to jump on it, be prepared, and take advantage of it. And the few things that I would mention with mentorships right now is don't be afraid to reach out to people. I see some names on this list of people who are attending tonight. And I can actually tell you I'm thrilled to see some of them on here because I've had a chance to speak to them. And the only reason I spoke to them is because they either reached out to me through LinkedIn or they picked up the phone and called me. And I had a nice opportunity to speak with most of you who did call or have reached out to me. So the one other point I want to leave you with from a mentorship point of view is be open-minded. Not every single opportunity might be the opportunity that you dream of when you get the initial opportunity. And you're not going to be able to take a path which is going to be an easily designed path where I'm going to go from point A to point B. You might go from A to Z and Z to P before you get back to B. And what I mean by that is you don't know where your career is going to take you. The sports industry is growing. If someone would have told me 5 years ago about opportunities in esports or sports gambling from a legal perspective, I probably would have chuckled. Now those are two boom areas in addition to a number of the areas that we're still focusing on. Eric talked about name, image, and likeness issues. Another area, 5 years ago, people would have been, I think, probably chuckling, thinking about the NCAA. We're waiting to see the vote in January for what legislation they're going to propose for name, image, and likeness rights that's going to be passed. So the world of sports is always changing. It's always interesting. And I think the biggest thing is get diverse legal knowledge, get as many different courses, many different areas as you can to be prepared to take advantage of any opportunity that comes your way.
And I can go next year. One story that kind of triggered in my mind from here from both Gregg and Ayisha is at the XFL. I wasn't tasked immediately with our player contract, our standard player contract, but I wanted to be prepared when that discussion came up. So I had redlined an NFL contract, which I knew very well already, a CFL contract. There was a league called the Alliance of American Football. I had their contract redlined. Two other leagues that you guys never have heard of that almost started, what their contract looked like. So I had this ready to go at a moment's notice, working on other projects. So when that meeting happened, I actually remember the situation. I asked if I could join the meeting just as a bystander to kind of be around and listen in. And quickly I was able to kind of chime in on very pointed discussions on a standard player contract for a football league, which the NFL is ironed out. But for a new football league, it's a nightmare going through every single clause in there and what they mean and how it all fits together. And being prepared was something that I did, but I would instill that everyone, if you're at a law firm and want to get into sports and you're not in their sports practice quite yet, but you want to be a part of it, know what they're working on, know what they're doing, and try to do as much research or information as you can. And that goes for finding a mentor. I tell law students or college students all the time, don't just reach out to somebody and just say, hey, I want to meet you. I really need your help and advice. Try to find some way to add value or show that you've thought about them ahead of time. Hey, you went to this law school. I know someone here. Hope you're well. I thankfully have a lot of good relationships in the industry, but I am always every week trying to find someone else I should meet and have an introduction to, not for any purpose, but maybe down the road I might have that. So whether that's someone to make a connection to in the industry or look for a mentorship, that stuff takes time, and know it's not going to happen overnight, and try to build as many good relationships as you can. In terms of mentorship, I've had, just a handful in my career, but I mentioned the XFL earlier. Get a chance to work with Oliver Luck, who was the commissioner of the XFL, was fantastic. And Oliver had played in the NFL, has a tremendously interesting background. But after his NFL career, got his law degree. He's worked for NCAA programs as an athletic director. He worked for the NCAA for a long time, and he was a commissioner of the XFL. And his day-to-day wasn't a lot of legal work, but certainly that law background helped him quite a bit. And that's what I do a lot now, is not necessarily all the transactional work day to day, but learning from him about how to manage that. And more importantly, which I think everyone on the call can appreciate, explaining it to non-lawyers in a way that can really be powerful and impactful. He is masterful at that. And I think working with him, being prepared where I can kind of jump in with him on projects I wasn't directly working on, really helped me, but he was someone that I still, can call and speak with frequently and ask for advice. And he's a mentor that I kind of learned and got to work with closely because of happenstance. But he's someone that I learned so much from just watching him and being in the meeting room around him, not even talk about things directly. So mentorship sometimes come luckily. I didn't plan to be mentored by Oliver Luck, but I thankfully was. But no matter what, try to add as much value to people you're working with or not working with whenever possible. That'll usually work out pretty well.
Great, thank you. So next, I wanted to ask Ayisha, can you talk to us a little bit about your typical day as an associate at Proskauer and the diversity of the projects you've gotten to work on? During law school, you interned with the NBA, the NFL, and XL Sports Management. How have those experiences helped, and what has been completely new?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that this year has been an interesting one for me. So I, officially started at Proskauer in fall of 2019, going into 2020, and then COVID happened. So I officially became a part of our corporate sports group when there were no sports, which meant that it was a very interesting transition for me and for everyone else. The work that was coming through was a lot of fire drills. It was a lot of high level stuff that didn't always necessarily trickle down to the most junior people in the group, because you were just trying to get back on the court, just get back on the field, figure out what was happening, what would happen, and how to make sense of this new reality. So as things have started to kind of pan out and have some level of normalcy at this point, a typical day is still not that typical, which is actually typical, not to, use the same word a whole bunch of times. But there is a lot of variety in what we do in our corporate sports practice, and actually something that made it so appealing to me to pursue the group, because on any given day you're dealing with debt financing, you're dealing with ownership transfers, you're dealing with some traditional M&A related things, you might be dealing with sponsorship stuff. The range is actually quite broad, and like I kind of hinted at, the impact of COVID has definitely colored the range in terms of kind of scaling it down a bit in terms of what that typical day looks like. You may see some, lead expansion stuff come down, but the start and stop of work has been interesting because of the uncertainty of this time. And it's important to highlight that at its core, the work that we do is traditional corporate work. And in the same way that deals are affected by the market, it's the same thing for sports. So the range is broad. I've been able to see pieces of that range, and that's something that I'm grateful for. But COVID has definitely impacted what my reality has been in terms of transitioning into the group. My internships are still, I think back on how kind of crazy it was and what it was to really balance all of that at the same time. I was at the NFL my entire 2L year, and XL and NBA my 3L year, and it was always juggling quite a bit, running from work to class, and having other leadership responsibilities in law school as well. I think work ethic is for sure one thing that has transitioned. Being able to work with people on the other side of the table is also a really nice feature as well. There have been a number of matters where someone sees me on an email chain and they're like, "Oh, hey, great to see you." That's nice. But I would definitely say that one big kind of thing that was a learning point and definitely has helped quite a bit is I was able to do quite a bit of drafting when I was at XL. GC, Gabe Mattis, is by far one of my favorite people in the world, and one of my favorite supervisors or managers. He's phenomenal. And he very much was someone with just throw the lob and be like, you know what, figure it out. This is what we need. I need you to kind of give me your best take at a first draft of some type of agreement, some type of sponsorship, some type of, memorandum of understanding or whatever might be needed. And that kind of figure it out, draft, look at what precedent we have. Those are definitely skills that I draw from, because there are times in big law as a junior associate, you may not, depending on where you are and depending on what you're asked to do, you may not have a ton of drafting experience, but you may have assignments where you get off the phone or you finish reading the email that you receive and you're like, I have no idea what you just asked me to do. I thought that I did, but I actually really don't. But you have to kind of take the step back and ask yourself, well, what can I draw from? What have I done that's similar to this? Like Eric was saying, what red lines can I run that can allow me to make the inference of what's standard, what is just specific to this transaction, what are the questions that I need to ask so that when I go back to you and I've thought through this, I'm able to say, okay, got it. This is what you asked me to do. But in order to do that, there are 5 steps that I need to do to get to that point. If there's anything that's unclear within those 5 steps, now I have a list of questions that I can go ask. So that kind of thought process and strategy and procedure, I think, is definitely something that I've been able to draw from. And I had similar experiences at the NBA as well. Their legal group are, phenomenal group of attorneys. So that has been definitely something that I draw from a lot. The work that I did at the NFL was very different. I was with Management Counsel, which is, their labor group, and I don't do that work now. But again, that work ethic, that understanding of asking questions and going through the process and the strategy that's necessary to get to that final endpoint, those are definitely takeaways.
Great, thank you. So next I wanted to go to Gregg, and I wanted to ask you, earlier you spoke a bit about just your diversity of experiences, whether it be on the agent side or whether it be on the legal side. And I just wanted to ask you, how's it all work together and kind of developed your career, whether it be your now legal expertise and your strengths, or just in terms of building a book of business?
I think that's a good question. I think what Eric said earlier is very true about the diversities of experience when it comes to sort of growing your practice and growing your areas of expertise. Having worked on the agent side for about 2 decades and being exposed to some incredible opportunities as a result of the clients I was fortunate enough to work with and represent, really opened up my world quite a bit in terms of the different legal nuances and the things that you frankly never thought you'd be dealing with or never thought you'd be negotiating. As you enter the agent world, you think, as probably most people might think, a lot of it is negotiating contracts. And I can tell you that's probably less than 5% about what a good agent does in terms of the sport contracts. The other aspects of your career that you get involved in are really a personal attorney for your clients. And I think that's one area where a lot of young agents get themselves in trouble because they're afraid to create what I call a circle of trust. They want to try and do all things for all their clients, and they make mistakes because no one has the areas of expertise to work in all these specific areas that come up when it comes to representing an athlete, whether it be taxes, whether it be estate planning, whether it be real estate law, whether it be corporate law in terms of creating LLCs and things like that as your clients grow. So from that perspective, it was a very general practice of law, and I forget to jump in on family law when it comes to prenuptial agreements and custody arrangements, unfortunately, for clients who don't have marriages that work out. So an incredible general practice of law, I think, from an agent perspective, which is a lot different than when you go back, in my case, to the management side, which is a much more focused practice, where we represent our clients in a very narrow specified area. In my case, our firm does labor and employment law. We don't do the classic corporate law with mergers and acquisitions, but we get involved with mergers and acquisitions from a labor and employment perspective. So we'll have somebody who's potentially interested in buying a sports franchise, whether it be a major league or a minor league franchise, call us and ask us to give them advice and counsel on existing agreements, whether there be joint employer issues, whether there's liability potentially relating to employment agreements, whether there's WARN Act issues in terms of laying various employees off. So you have that perspective. And then, from the colleges and university and ultimately the conferences, there's so many legal issues that have come up literally in the last 8 months that I don't think many attorneys have handled ever in their careers. And they're trying to provide advice with literally the law almost changing on a daily basis from the CDC and other federal laws that have been passed has been very, very challenging, but also very rewarding, because when you're able to help a conference or specific organizations come up with the right plan, finishing, for example, with a couple conferences, their referee agreements and and making sure they have compliance with not only the state and the federal laws, but also a lot of the NCAA restrictions in terms of having proper testing. Also implementing proper testing for colleges and coming up with some of these plans that they're utilizing to try and make sure we're able to have a tournament this spring. As we've seen COVID spiking all over the country, it's going to be a huge challenge. But again, from my perspective, it's a fascinating legal issue. And then, of course, some of the other legal issues, which are more the norm that we deal with from a corporate perspective in the labor and employment area, is helping teams. I do a lot of salary arbitration advisory work. I do a lot of work with sports agencies in terms of fee collections and fee grievances and things like that. So, and I also am able, through good fortune, to represent a lot of my former athlete clients who now have gone on to either do charitable work or form LLCs or have businesses of their own. So it's been a nice run and a transition that's been, from my perspective, a lot smoother than I thought it was going to be when I moved over to the management side. So, and it also gives me perspective now that I'm on the management side, especially when it comes to working with teams, is having that perspective of knowing what athletes are thinking and some of the pressure points that athletes are thinking about during contract negotiation or salary arbitration cases. Having been on that side and experienced it from that perspective, I think makes it valuable to understand it from the management side now.
Great, thank you. Eric, can you also talk to us about your journey? You're now running your own scouting business at Optimum, and you are the director of player personnel at the XFL. Early in your career, you were a legal advisor to the Minnesota Vikings. Can you talk to us about how you've grown through those experiences in counseling players and teams on legal matters?
Yeah. So a lot of my work initially was advising agents, pro teams on the player personnel and scouting side, but obviously my law degree, which I got, during Optimum Scouting, right? So even though it's called Optimum Scouting, we do actually do legal work and business work as well, not just scouting. I probably should change the LLC at some point, but that brand is strong, so I got to keep going. But no, I think as one benefit I have from working from the team side with the Vikings for a little bit, agents, NFL teams, startup leagues. One thing that I take a lot of pride in, I kind of mentioned this earlier, is having, I say it's better to have a guy than be the guy, meaning it's better to have great people around you and resources around you, as opposed to being the one who's doing the work for one particular thing. And I've thankfully have a lot of great people around me. So something that Gregg said about, managing, figuring out how to deal with things legally with COVID is a question that literally nobody in the world has the answer to, but certainly people I know that have been athletic trainers or the former VP of health and safety for the XFL, I can call him and lean on him and try to get better perspective, because especially COVID's a great example. There's no easy solve. There's no correct answer. There's no boilerplate to rely on. So you need to have that kind of understanding and perspective that you can't have yourself. No matter how many years you do this or how many different things you experience, I'm not going to have perspective, especially when it comes to things outside of my purview of football or player personnel or scouting or analytics or legally. I need that perspective as well. So I think one thing I've taken is every place I've gone, everyone I've worked with, I try to steal a person that I have in my back pocket and say, hey, I know who to call for that person. Hey, I know I can call her for, XYZ question. I have a lot of those people kind of in my, data term, but Rolodex at my ready. So I would say for, one thing I try to do is have a lot of people that I can trust. And thankfully, I think I add value to them as well. It's not a one-sided street. So I'm trying to also add value and say, hey, this is what I would do from the football perspective. Here's so you can make health and safety requirements and so on and so forth. So, everything I do, touches the legal world. And whether I'm advising on strategy or advising on, a contract language, that perspective I keep coming back to helps me quite a bit in my job. It allows me to do a lot of different things at all times. And I think making sure for me, leveraging every experience I have in every place I work and trying to get people along with me for the journey makes my life a lot easier. And I know that if I have a question, I don't have to guess. I don't have to go back to the client. I can just call up XYZ person and have much better grasp on things than I did before.
Great. So next I wanted to ask the three of you just about balance, because I think that sometimes being a sports attorney is a lot of juggling. You have to do the traditional work of billing a large amount of hours, but you also, whether it's Eric with 30,000 followers on Twitter, or is that right? 30,000?
A little more than that, but we'll give you 30,000.
And I know, Gregg, you founded the Jackson Lewis Sports Law blog. You're writing, you're a professor. Ayisha, you've always done these speaking appearances, and it can't be easy doing it as an associate when you're expected to bill a lot of hours. How do you kind of balance the responsibilities of doing both the traditional legal work and the extra work that's required to uplift your brand as a sports attorney?
Still trying to figure that out, aren't we?
Yeah, I can jump in, and one thing I just really want to flag for our law students is it's really important to set a firm foundation. So what you're used to doing in terms of wearing a lot of hats and juggling a lot of things in law school may not be in your best interest to do the same thing as a junior attorney. You want to make sure you're gaining the technical skills. So while, I've been able to contribute to some of the writing that we do for the firm, and may, speak on a panel here and there, my primary focus right now at this point in my career, especially being so junior, is getting the skills and the experience that will then, eventually allow me to be more of an expert. And that balance, if I'm, doing a speaking event like this, speaking on a panel, I know that at the end of this call, I'm going to log back on. Well, I haven't technically logged off. I'm just away for the moment, right? But I'm going to log back on and do what needs to be done, because at the end of the day, no one really cares that I'm on a panel if that means that I'm not doing the work that needs to be done for our clients. But I do think it's really important to make sure that you're gaining the skills and the experience, which actually does mean taking a step back in certain areas, depending on where you are in, the full kind of gambit of your career. So that's just one thing that I wanted to flag, because I want to hear more from Gregg and Eric about how they balance it, and those are mental notes that I'll make for as I progress. But I think that starting out, it's really important to kind of be firm on gaining the experiences and gaining the skills.
I'll jump in here. I guess I think the biggest thing you have to remember is you have to love what you do. And I've been very fortunate. I always say I've kind of had two different careers. During my full-time agent perspective, that was a great run. And now I'm having a lot of fun and enjoying what I do on a daily basis at Jackson Lewis. So I think that's the first thing, is if you can enjoy what you do for a living, that makes it a lot better. I think also the work-life balance is important. Obviously, when you move on in your life and you have a wife and children and those issues, you want to make sure you try and provide some time and focus for them. But at the same point, the hardest part I think about a legal career is people forget sometimes we are in sales. And what I mean by that is it'd be great if you didn't have to go out and sort of crush the streets a little bit and meet people and look for your next client, because it's not only through word of mouth, which is a great resource that all of us rely upon, but it's also about meeting new people and perhaps matching up your skills with some skill that they have and sort of working together sometimes. I can't tell you how many times I've met different people and we're able to combine and provide different services to a client, perhaps a new client for both of us, or I might provide a little bit of the sports and the labor and employment, and they might have more of a corporate background. So again, I think it's being eyes wide open, trying to balance the work and the life. Yeah, you have to take a little bit of time for yourself, but at the end of the day, as much as I hate to admit it, being a lawyer is probably a 7-day-a-week job. And there aren't too many weekends where I don't bring some work home for me, or I'm not reading something, or I'm trying to get updates on the law with certain things changing, especially this year. It's been incredibly challenging, but also incredibly rewarding. So I think the biggest thing is that we never stop learning. And I think all of you who are currently in law school, don't think that when you're done and you get your diploma and you pass the bar, that you're now done. It's really just the beginning, because that's the process that you're going to start out. You're going to start meeting new people. You're going to meet new people like Ayisha was just describing through her firm, and you're going to get new experiences. And how do you take those experiences and grow with them? And there's going to be some tough days. You're going to hit some speed bumps along the way. There's no doubt about that. Nothing goes smoothly or smooth sailing, as they say. So be prepared for that. And then if any of you are athletes, you don't win every game. You go 0 for 3 sometimes, and sometimes you go, 5 for 20 from the field if you're a basketball player. But you bounce back. And I think the same thing is true here. You have to be resilient. You have to keep pursuing your goals and also pursuing knowledge and trying to learn more. And then also try and focus on an area where you can become a specialist. I mentioned esports earlier. I mentioned sports gambling law. A lot of attorneys who've been doing this for a long time are probably not taking the time to learn about esports or sports gambling or become potentially experts in those areas. You as young lawyers look at that and take advantage of it, because those areas are not going away. They're going to keep growing, and you'll have an opportunity to join a firm or work with a more experienced attorney, where you might have actually more experience than that individual firm or that individual attorney does. So those are just a few little ideas and thoughts I had.
Yeah, I'll go next. For me, you mentioned the balance in the work, and thanks for the Twitter shout out. Appreciate it. I think I just got 3 followers on Twitter right now, so I appreciate the shout out. But no, I mean, for me, I'm very purposeful, right, in everything that I'm doing. This, my day is, the usual 9 to 5, or I think for every attorney, it's 8 to 6 at best, right? But that is when you're working, and everything else you're doing on top of that, whether it's sales, social media, networking, I try to be as purposeful as possible, right? I want to be, on this call, to both instill what I've learned to hopefully help future law students like I was, but also to learn from Gregg and Ayisha, to maybe make a connection with one of you here who may find me on LinkedIn or find my email address and shoot me an email. Maybe I learned something from you in the future. So for me, this is a purposeful decision. It's a selfish move for me to be here, because I want to learn. And for me, using social media is the same way. Yeah, but I mentioned before, I'm constantly, for me, the marketing piece, as Gregg said, a lot of the unwritten thing, especially later on, is sales and trying to drive new people. But the networking piece, everyone says it all the time too. But how do you network effectively? You've got to be aggressive. You've got to be purposeful all the time. And for me, that's how I balance it. Is I know that, hey, my day from tomorrow it's going to be 7 a.m. until at least 6:30. I've got to do X, Y, Z. I have meetings to do. I have deadlines to meet. I have products to turn over to our clients. But I know that, hey, I got to squeeze in some time to just call somebody who I may have to ask a question to in the future. Hey, someone just to check in, because I know a month from now I may need them. So that's where for me is trying to find the times to make sure you're not dismissing networking, dismissing the benefits of trying to be a salesman and a saleswoman, but also make sure you're being purposeful. I try to plan out. I'm a psycho sometimes. I've got a big Excel sheet that I have listed of everybody I know in the industry and the last time I spoke with them. And I try to make sure I'm always circling back on these people. And it's upwards of 200 people at sometimes. And but I try to make sure I'm being purposeful with my time, because if you're not, the sales piece, you can't bill for that. You can't bill a client you don't have. So it's your time away, and I'm costing myself X amount of dollars by being on social media. I better put it to good use. So I try to be as purposeful as possible with everything I do, and I would encourage law students to be aggressive, but also very purposeful and balancing that work-life balance. Because I know as a 1L, and I'm sorry, as a first year or second year or third year, it's a ton of work, and you better be really efficient with your time, because you're going to make a lot of mistakes in those first couple of years that maybe you can't get that time back. So I would encourage people to be, again, extremely purposeful in that work-life balance.
Thank you. Those were all very great answers. I actually started taking notes myself, because I could probably use that advice as soon as next year. I wanted to go to the audience really quickly. Hayes Rule, you may know him from Florida State Law. He has a question, so I'm going to call on Hayes quickly.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Well, first off, thank you all for coming tonight. It's been great hearing from each of you, and even just that last bit, like Vieux was mentioning, I feel like I need to take some notes down here. But a question that I had for each of you is, how do you build relationships with in-house attorneys or personnel and teams? And kind of what's the best way to build trust with them so they're continuing to send work to you that they need done?
I guess I'll jump in on that one as someone who made the transition from having been in certain respects adversarial with some of the in-house counsel, a number of teams, as we negotiated contracts, multi-year agreements with guarantee provisions and other assorted amendments in those agreements. I always tried to, when I was on the agent side of the business, to earn the respect of in-house counsel or anyone else on the other side of the business. Not with an intention that I might be joining them on the same side of the business, but I always thought, if someone respects you, and it's not even about your knowledge of the law, but just how you handle yourself, kind of like Eric said, the importance of being professional, the importance of maintaining relationships. I always valued that part of the business. And now when I've gone and switched over to the other side of the business, it was something that you do slowly. I'm still working on it because people have existing relationships, and you don't want to be a bully and try and interrupt those relationships, because number one, you won't, and number two, you'll look foolish. But if you can find some way to be a value added, and that's even from, as Ayisha said, when you're a young associate, you try and find some value added space. The same thing goes now as a more veteran and an experienced attorney, is what value can I add to perhaps a younger general counsel or a younger associate general counsel who's looking for some answers to a problem or a concern that's arisen. So we try to be ready, willing, and able. And we see a lot more of that in the college space now, as we're seeing a lot more unfortunate COVID-19 layoffs and reductions in furloughs. There's a lot of schools that have a lot less people they can turn to. So we want to help and try and fill that void, and obviously being cost sensitive as well during this COVID crisis, we're trying to position ourselves to be that value added alternative, whether it be on the professional level or on the collegiate level, or even on the agent level, frankly, if they have issues and concerns that arise. So I think that the biggest thing more than anything else for me when I've tried to establish relationships now with general counsel is, again, being patient, taking the time to get to know them, realizing what some of their needs or some of their concerns might be, and also respecting their existing relationships and not expecting, just because they know you and they might even like you, that they're going to all of a sudden start hiring you to work for them. You have to earn that. And I think that takes time. And as I said before, the most important word, I think, for any aspiring sports lawyer is, while you're pursuing your dreams, you have to be patient. At the same time, you have to be prepared. So the more things that you can read, the more things you can learn. I think, Eric gave some great examples. I mean, he's pretty diverse, perhaps, when where he thought he would be 5 years ago in terms of the different roles he's taking on and advising people. But he's taken the time to learn the information and be able to provide value-added services to the potential clients he wants to service.
Yeah, if I can go next here to add on what Gregg mentioned is I mentioned networking and reaching out and being aggressive. I think people get confused sometimes between networking and quietly asking for a job. And I think the latter part is not going to work. So I would advise everyone on the call, if you want to work with, be an outside counsel or get to meet general counsels, reach out now, not in July when you're studying for the bar exam and where your next job's going to be, and just reach out to say hello and make a connection, right? Something I try to do all the time. And again, I'm that psycho with that Excel sheet, is put little anecdotes in there, right? And say, hey, I thought of you with this article. I know you mentioned this on your last call, or hey, if they do have a blog or they do, are on social media or on LinkedIn, try to find some connection, and not to be a suck up, but to show them that, hey, I generally want to learn from you and meet with you. And that's the best way to have that relationship. Because as Gregg pointed out, it takes years sometimes to develop the right agency. I know for me, just in the agent space, working with agents for a long time, I've been building that relationship for 20 years. And there is one agent this year who we now work with, who I've known for 20 years. And I finally got him to be an official client more than a friend. And it takes that long sometimes, but it was never me pressing. It was me trying to add value, stay in touch, be genuine. And when they have a need, they're going to go to you first. And, just like a whole sports profession, lawyers or otherwise, those job postings don't come very often. When people have a job, they want to go to someone they already know, and to be that person that person's already thinking of, that's the real secret.
Yeah, I would just add, on top of just being intentional and being consistent, you want to be genuine. People can tell very quickly, and Eric touched on this, like if you're operating from the space of trying to learn and be a value add, or if you're trying to say, hey, I'm seeking employment, which is definitely why law school is a key time to get connected. And people, I remember hearing that even as a law student, they're like, this is the time to reach out and get to know people, because they're not afraid that you're asking them for a job, and they'll be a bit more open and willing to engage. And that definitely was the experience that I had. I also think being consistent, right? So that's something I mentioned earlier, and I would definitely echo again here. When you do send that article, when you do check in and give those updates, it's helpful to do that on a recurring basis. If the Excel spreadsheet works for you like it works for Eric, that's great. If you're able to kind of go off of your memory, that works too. But that's definitely something that, whether it's sending a text or sending an email, when I remember when our bubble game started, my first thought wasn't just like, okay, how can I make sure I'm done with work for, the start of the game? I was also emailing my old boss, like, you've done a terrific job. I know you probably haven't slept in months. Would love to connect, when the season is done, right? And that's a really quick moment where you can let someone know you're on the top of my mind and you're operating in a way that you want them to have you on the top of their mind as well. And it's coming from a genuine place, right? I know how hardworking that attorney is, and I know how much work went into making that happen because, the firm also worked in some capacity on, whatever the touch point was to make it happen and had, attorneys down in the bubble. So there are things that you can do to be genuine and be consistent in touch place and just know that people can sense it. So there's no need to kind of pretend, and there's no need to force it, right? If there isn't a connection, if you're not really making headway, that's fine. That's not your only way in, your only entry point, the only people you'll connect with. You'll find those genuine connections where it's organic and it will be able to withstand the test of time. And you can go back at whatever point it is and know that you've done your due diligence and kind of thinking about what it is that you can add, but also how you can nurture and cultivate the relationship as well.
Thank you. All great points. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all the panelists for joining us tonight. Mr. Clifton, you mentioned this a little bit, but my question is with three more states legalizing gambling last week and the NFLPA taking an ownership stake in a DFS site, what type of challenges do you foresee for franchises and organizations in managing that growth, and what opportunities does that present for us as lawyers?
I knew you were going to ask the hard question, John. I think that that's really a multi-pronged question. It's an excellent question. I think you have to break it down into sections. I think from a team's perspective, obviously, and the overriding, I think, concern for all of these things is to make sure the game still becomes the focus. And I'll use the word the sanctity of the game, making sure that there's nothing that interrupts or disrupts the fan base from knowing that every given game, whether they're gambling or not, is a game that truly has both sides trying to win. I'm old enough to remember, a Boston College scandal, and there's been other scandals over the years with athletes being tempted with financial rewards for not necessarily throwing a game, but perhaps having a game fall within the space of what the spread was. And I think, right now we're in this kind of a let's go get it mentality where we're sort of not worrying about those issues a little bit. And there are some safeguards that are put in place, I think, to make sure we don't have crazy gambling and crazy bets on games that no one should be really paying much attention to. So I think that's the first overriding issue that's going to impact leagues, teams, as well as players associations, are just to make sure anything that goes on in gambling, we don't lose sight of the fact the most important thing is to make sure we keep credibility in the space of the games that we all love to watch. So I think that's number one. Number two, once you get over that, I think, let's be honest, there's a lot of money to be potentially made. And I think everyone would love to get a piece of that revenue stream, especially as we're seeing everyone having to adjust to fanless games as a result of COVID-19. And we don't know how far that's going to go into 2021. So is there a potential revenue source that allows people at home to sit there on their phones or on their computers and gamble on the next pitch or the next play, whether it be a basketball free throw or a football 3rd and 5? Are they going to make it, or are they going to have to punt? So there's going to be a tremendous amount of interest, I think, as we move on here with regard to gambling. We're seeing record amounts of handles in a number of states. So again, we have to have the safeguards, but at the same point, there's tremendous growth and tremendous opportunity, I think, for revenue streams. And again, what do we all know? If the revenue streams grow and the games grow from a revenue perspective, not too far away are going to be the athletes asking for a piece of that, whether that's through some type of salary, whether it's through endorsement opportunities, whatever it might be. So I think gambling is a fascinating area. And based upon your question, I think all three spaces provide opportunity for young lawyers, because again, in terms of the enforcement and the enactment of gambling laws on a state-by-state basis, very interesting to watch. There's going to be nuances in each state and how those nuances are handled. From a player's perspective, from an agent's perspective, are there opportunities for players to seek out and secure endorsement agreements? From the union's perspective, are there opportunities for them from a group revenue or group licensing perspective? So again, there's tremendous opportunity in these multiple columns. But again, the overriding concern that I think we all need to make sure we keep our eyes on is making sure we don't see anything impacting the love of the game and, as I said, the overall sanctity of the game, to making sure that gambling doesn't interrupt that in any way.
Does anyone have anything else to add on that subject, or?
Not enough to speak higher than I know Gregg's experience. I know at the XFL, just use that story real quick, gambling was a centerpiece of a lot of our discussions and how to manage that, because the XFL wanted to, they were the first league to have the spread, on the bottom of the screen.
Yep.
And at halftime, it was, the over-under's this, and then the live bet is here. And I know Fox Bet was our partner, and they had the live bet there too. So for us, it was, we didn't really know how it was going to go, to be honest. And we had to kind of navigate those, having those set policies in place. Just like COVID, just like, gambling, just like NIL, we're kind of setting policies and figuring what the right decision is before knowing how it'll play out. And for us, it was a lot of, thankfully, we had no issues and no competitive balance issues, but I've learned a lot from that. And I'm sure Gregg and people that are working in the sports gambling space are, especially with DFS and the rise of that, are learning a shitload every day you do it, because it's all changing and evolving state to state and month to month.
All right. Well, lastly, I wanted to ask about advice. I think this is a great topic to end on. I know we talk so much about networking, mentoring, building relationships. We got a lot of great tips on that. So I guess I'll take it in a different direction. Can you give us law students any tips on where to look for jobs? You'd say, where can we, I guess, start in terms of whether it be job fairs, searching on LinkedIn, just any advice that you would have that on breaking into the industry, or what you wish you would have knew when you were in law school, and really just anything that we haven't mentioned already.
I can go first quick, because I think my advice would be those job postings aren't likely coming, or not very many of them. Job fairs are not going to have your dream job. And I think trying to make relationships in the industry, and I think something Ayisha said early on too, try to learn a lot. And this sounds dumb, but be really smart. So when those questions come up, you can handle them appropriately. And sports law is, I always joke, sports law is not really a thing. It's transactional law with a sports understanding, right? Sports is kind of the fun thread of all this stuff, but knowing contract law really well, knowing employment law very well, that's what, and the transactional piece of that, or litigation piece of that, that's the best advice I can give, is try to be as prepared as possible. And if you want to work in sports, be really smart at everything not sports, and know how to do those skills either before you go to a firm or at a firm, like Ayisha pointed out, and try to be as educated as possible. But again, those jobs don't really open up. It's about having understanding the industry and meeting a lot of people. And when those jobs are going to be available, they don't go on a job board. They go from someone's cell phone to someone they've already known and say, hey, I've got a job here. Can you do this? So my advice would be try to be as educated and as refined as possible. But networking will be the big differentiator, not your resume or a cover letter. It'll be your relationships that get you that job.
I'll jump in quickly. I think the one thing that I've spoken to several of you on the call tonight about, and John in particular, I know we've spent some time talking, is try to become a leader at your law school in the area that you're interested in. A number of law schools have either burgeoning or just, a couple of years sports law practices beginning in terms of curriculum. Get in front of that. Try and encourage your deans to create a sports law protocol, whether it just be basic sports law, growing from there, and also be active if you have sports law societies or programs at your school. Be aggressive. Try to become a leader in that, because I can tell you, if you reach out from a networking perspective and you call somebody to potentially come to your school, or perhaps now it's through a Zoom call like this, they're probably going to respond because they're going to be impressed by the fact that you're reaching out and you're not asking for a job. And I think, I don't know whether it was Ayisha or it was Eric who said it, but the bottom line is the jobs will come. As I've used the word a couple of times, you have to be patient, but at the same time, you have to be prepared. And I think some of the opportunities that your law schools have, not everyone is going to be as fortunate enough to have the background that Ayisha has had as she worked her way to get to Proskauer. Some people are not going to be as fortunate, perhaps not be as prepared as she was, but that doesn't mean you can't get into the sports industry. So I think, as we talked about, LinkedIn is probably not going to be your answer in terms of job opportunities, but making sure that people around you, and you're going to laugh when I say this, your mother, your father, your aunts, your uncles, your brothers, your sisters, your friends, make sure they all know, because they might know somebody. And circle that way. And that's the same way I always talk about client development. Go with the people who know you. Make sure they understand your interests. Then at the same time, use the spare time you have. I thought when Eric made a great point when he said when he went into the XFL and they were trying to draft a contract. Well, he got the NFL contract. He got the CFL contract. He was prepared, and therefore he was able to really offer value added within the environment that he was in. Same thing can be true with all of you, because you never know if your next door neighbor all of a sudden becomes a star athlete and you're 1 year out of law school and they remember you as the bright kid. They might want to call you about being that person's agent. You don't know. Those opportunities, believe it or not, do happen. So take the time. Now's a good opportunity. Read things. You have other opportunities like organizations like this, which I commend Hayes and all of you for forming this and getting this going for all of you. This puts you a step ahead of where everyone else is, or my generation was. Take advantage of this. Learn, read. Google's your good friend in terms of tracking down articles and information about people. And as I think all three of us have said, reach out to people, make connections, but do it in a positive way. And you'll be amazed how quickly, within a short period of time, you'll be able to really grow your network. And those are the people, when an opening occurs, are going to think of you and potentially consider you or recommend you for that job opportunity.
Yeah, I'll quickly add to that. When you know where your interests lie, it allows you to identify opportunities that might be appealing, right? Are you more interested on player side? Are you more interested on league side? Or is it esports? Is it, sports gambling? Do you actually have interest in marketing? Do you potentially want to be an agent? Like, there's so much you can actually do and touch sports in so many different ways. So it's really up to you to decide what your angle will be and where you want to see yourself, because you can then pursue opportunities based off of that, right? I think for me, and thank you, Greg, I've been really blessed to have the opportunities that I've had, and it has positioned me to be more league side, and it makes sense that the work that I do now, working at a firm representing all of those leagues, it kind of filters through. But it was really important to me to have the experience of being a little bit closer to the player side, working at Excel, working right alongside people who are doing, marketing work and agents, and, having that as an experience that broadened my understanding. But there actually is so much that you can do. And I think that when people act like sports is this like super guarded, kept area that you can't touch in any way, it kind of diminishes the reality of all the different areas of law that touch sports and all the different industries that touch sports in some way. So I it may be the naivete of being a very junior attorney, but I do think that the world is your oyster. You can get to where you want to get to. You just have to decide, do you want to play the long game or the short game? Is it really trying to get to a particular position in a particular industry? Is your goal to become the commissioner? Or is your goal to just be able to say that you worked at whatever establishment, whatever, league or team, or whatever the case may be? But the opportunities are there. They may not be there when you want them to be there, but they do exist. So I will echo something that Greg said about being patient and also just being prepared.
Great. Thank you all so much. I've learned so much just listening to the three of you. I really appreciate this opportunity. I just wanted to put on everybody's radar. We next have our networking hour, the first of the next 3 nights. Every single night, we're going to end this event with the networking hour from 9 to 10. So feel free to stay on and join us for that. And tomorrow, we're going to start back up with name, image, and likeness in Florida. The second panel is going to be soccer in North America. And then lastly, we'll have a panel on general counsels. Ayisha, Gregg, Eric, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure. Have a great night, and I'll look forward to networking with you all in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.